Hi, I'm Tanya. Thank you for your request for a proposal. I've got a couple of questions that we will need to ask your senior decision makers in order to be able to answer to your request. And this video is just here to run through some of those categories of questions so that you can determine what the best way would be to get someone to give us some detailed and precise answers on those questions. I've just made a couple of notes. I'm going to run through them quickly to just give you a background why we would need this. Unlike if you were training forklift drivers, for example, where you could simply put them onto a course, put 25 people through a course, and then, you know, if that works out well and they're driving okay, then you put the next batch through. Project management has got an organizational implication, and it also it has an organizational change aspect to it. So things don't stay exactly the same as they were before afterwards, and now you've just got a couple of trained people. And because of that, there's some decisions which senior management needs to make regarding how that implementation will actually go. We're assuming here that the training isn't just for the sake of informing people of what project management is about, but that the training is actually supposed to bring about some kind of change within the organization. And it's to be able to determine that we need to ask some more questions. So some of the categories of questions which we need to ask is some of the high-level project management objectives in line with the vision of the organization. So we need to know what that organizational vision is so that the projects that people do can feed into that vision, and so that the tasks which we train them into can support that. People will need to know at any one time, while I'm busy working on that, this is what we're trying to achieve and this is what we're working towards, so that they can discern their best actions in a moment. They would not, from a book or from a theory course or so on, be able to necessarily figure that out for themselves. So we've got to train into what the organization is trying to achieve. So we've got some questions we need to ask around that. We also would need to understand something more of how the reporting works, and that's why I've drawn this diagram to just run you through some of those questions. If we're assuming that this is your international head office and those are regional offices, we want to understand what comes here. Is this country offices, for example, or are we talking in your instance about somebody who's dealing with Africa as a region at the top? We understand that, you know, head office is not necessarily there for the organization as a whole, but if that is Africa as a whole, then these would be, are these country heads? In other words, have you got country offices, or do you work do people report in via other structures? Do they, for example, report in according to your strategic objectives? Have you got people who are reporting in under infrastructure development or under expansion and any of your 5 or so strategic objectives? Or do they report in under operational heads? Are they going under wholesale, retail, and so on? This is important to know because project management is cross-functional, and we need to know what functions they're reporting into, because we're going to have to deal with that, let's call it for now a conflict of interest. It's not quite the right word for it, but it's where you have conflicting priorities coming from projects and from operations. A project which is designed to bring about some kind of change, and I understand your strategic projects would be probably typical. You're trying to do some kind of expansion, trying to go into new markets, or you're trying to build infrastructure where there currently isn't some. And that thing means that we're going to have to draw resources from who are currently reporting in under your business as usual, who have to be drawn in to take part in those projects. So let me just put, let's say, a project manager for a specific project on the side like this. That's a project manager who is then drawing in resources from, say, there, and maybe even from some other, I don't know, department or region, whichever way you've got that done. So your operational guys are affected by that, which means that the training is not just for the people who run the projects. And that's something that we have to understand. We have to understand how that is organized. That also determines who the groups will be to be trained. If you would like to have the first group of 25 people trained, for example, and you have a strong reporting up into a regional head office, that means that these are going to be the guys who are affected with the change. So your first group of 25 would have to be the top of the region, and then some of those senior guys and possibly 1 or 2 of the other people in there, because there's some decisions that need to be made about how the organization will be restructuring to accommodate the newly learned information and to drive that towards strategic objectives. For example, are you going to, as a result of this training, eventually, well, not eventually, but sooner rather than later, set up an extra department to support your project, the so-called project management office, which functions there, or which functions there, or does this sit completely on the side here and then serve all those regions? So we need to know something about that to be able to help you to steer towards that decision, and to provide training to be able to support the best choice there. Is this, for example, going to be, are you going to have duplications of this? Are you going to do this on a regional basis where each region or where each business function or so on has its own internal project management office? Those are things that we need to work out together with you. So that's why we've got some questions around there. And then also, there's some questions around the what level of what they call project management maturity are you at the moment already? Do you perhaps already have such a structure, or do you have some structures in certain environments? And how are they working out at the moment? We've got some questions there about what needs to change, what it needs to change to, and how to change. Now those category headings I get from a guy by the name of William Detmer, who follows Goldrat's approach to project management, so that when we design our project management training, it's designing towards the organizational change so that you can have measure your return on your investment, and that make sure that we target it there. So let me get out of the theory for a moment to give you an example of what I'm talking about. When we say what is it that must change, let's say it's the way that our present project management reporting is done was through 3-hour meetings, and people come unprepared and they can't tell us where are we with the time, and how's it going with the money, and are we delivering on our promises, and what are today's risks. This isn't happening. So let's say that's the current situation. What to change to? So maybe there you want to say, what we want as a result of this training is we would like to have a dashboard which the CEO or the top dog or the regional manager or the business lead or whatever it may be can at a glance see all the projects rolled up into a single picture of some sort, some kind of a pie chart, bar chart, or whatever, to see where we are with our projects, and to be able to make strategic decisions quickly, and where all the other people who are working on the projects know what their tasks are for the day and know what they need to report in terms of deviations and how to report them. So if we're training into that, that means that the next steps to the next question to that will be how to change. And with how to change, we can be of assistance. We can make a recommendation to that based on what we train into. So here, for example, you would typically need to have training for a project scheduler. Once everybody, of course, understands the project management principles, they can all be involved in that planning. But we need to have very specific hands-on training for a project scheduler in something like Microsoft Project. I personally actually undertake that part, working on your own real projects. We don't do a theory book-based course for that, otherwise you're wasting your time. And that scheduler would then be responsible for scheduling those projects and keeping them up to date based on reports which are coming back through the field. We need to train people into how to report from the field, and then rolling all of that up for, let's say, a region, and then that gets reported there. Or you've got a central scheduler who's reporting for all of those regions. Those are things that we need to determine. So we've got to ask some questions to be able to understand where we're going there. We help you discern how to identify internal guys who people who could be suitable for that role of scheduler, because it has a certain neurological profile and certain other kind of skills that you want to have. And then also for the supporting roles, such as project administrators and so on. But we need to understand this organization a bit better to be able to do that. We also have some questions in the category of risks, of our risks. Well, actually yours as well, your risks for success. For example, one of the big questions is, do you currently have individual KPIs, people being tested on key performance indicators, and where do those roll up to? So is the person who's working there reports to there and gets evaluated by this person, and then by some kind of operational leader? Because, and I'll give you the relevance of the question now, projects make changes. Like there's your work as usual, but now a project is to bring about some kind of change. if that person who's working on this team has got KPIs that they're reporting to here, and here's a project manager expecting them to do other stuff as well, so they now basically have two bosses, where are they going to put the focus of their attention? They're going to put their attention into satisfying this boss, who is actually giving them measures and who can determine whether they get a bonus or a raise or a new position and so on. So then your project falls flat because they're not going to satisfy this person's requirements. KPIs are a risk to project management implementation, and if that does exist in the organization, we have to decide jointly how we're going to deal with that. We can't just start training and then expect people will actually act in according to something when they're being rewarded for something else. So that's something. The other one is, just to stay on the subject of KPIs for a moment, if a whole department has got a certain KPI, then that department is going to work strongly against projects as well, just simply because based on what they're rewarded on, unless we change the system in some way. So it also shows why our first level of training needs to be for some senior decision makers, because these are some things that they need to work through before we can train guys down here. Remember, we're not driving a forklift here. So that's in terms of our risks. Let's see what else we need to ask. Okay, the one size fits all thing. If our first, let's assume you want us to start in one country only, and this works in a fairly autonomous way, because if you're working as very autonomously as officers, then the approach differs. So if you're working fairly autonomously, we will be working then with this team. We still need to have some of the senior guys in on the training, because they have to make the changes which are required to make to make stuff happen afterwards. But if we're then going to other regions, it doesn't mean that we do things in exactly the same way when we go to other regions. There are cultural considerations, there's personal capabilities which may be different there. You may have smaller teams. And then there's also language to be considered. It's very important because in project management we're often dealing with abstract terms. So you're dealing with the difference between accountability and authority and responsibility, for example. And it's very easy when you're saying, okay, that's a table, what is that in your language? But when we're dealing with these abstract terms, they can easily be mistranslated, and we can talk cross purposes, and we can talk over each other. We're grammatically using the correct sentences because, I can speak English fluently as my second language. But there's miscommunication actually happening, and we've seen this. We've worked in Africa, we've worked in multilingual environments before, and that's something we really need to take a look at. So my question is, how can we get some answers to these categories of questions? What's our next step so that we can be placed in a position to do a great proposal for you, to deliver a return on your investment, to work milestone based? If we should be favored with this, if we do go ahead, something that you would need to know is that training of this nature does not work through regular classroom courses where you go to a class, you write some kind of exam, now you're going to apply that. It needs to be done incrementally. It needs to be done with a return on the investment and we need to agree what that return will be on every step of the training. We don't move on to the next milestone until this milestone has been properly put to work at work. So that there's also some things that senior management needs to be aware of, that people are usually managing projects by their own knowledge, the seat of their pants and so on. And once they move over into a more formalized way, once they start that process, initially things slow down a lot because they're unaccustomed to it. They've got to go through more steps and so on before things speed up. And if senior management hasn't been part of that process, they're going to be frustrated with the slowing down. They're not going to support it. And then the people who are doing the work are going to go back to doing the old seat of their pants way, and they're not going to implement project management. Please bear in mind that this kind of exercise of trying to improve your project management and involving training there has a very, very high failure rate if it isn't done properly. You can try to find success stories on the internet, and you'll search for a couple of pages before you get one yourself. Oh, I found one, and then all that they did was install software, and it wasn't, didn't achieve that. So because we're dealing with a potentially high failure rate of bringing about a change in project management and how it runs, senior management involvement is very key to this process, and it's in fact the make or break factor there. We can't proceed and we can't do our work effectively if we don't have resolute leaders. We hope to hear from you soon.